We've decided to restructure the client relations department. Eleanor, today will be your last day. The words hung in the air of the sleek conference room like an unwelcome odor, made even more jarring by the bright May sunshine streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I stared at Jason Sterling, the new managing partner who had joined Morrison and Associates just 8 months ago. His expression was practiced, a careful blend of corporate regret and detached professionalism that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, Boston's skyline gleamed, oblivious to the earthquake happening inside me. After 25 years. My voice remained steady despite the tightness in my chest, each word feeling like it was being squeezed through a narrowing tunnel. The family photos on my desk flashed through my mind. Would they even let me take them all? Business decisions aren't personal, he replied, sliding a manila folder across the polished mahogany table with manicured fingers. HR has prepared a severance package, 2 months' salary and continuation of benefits through the end of the quarter. The folder landed with a soft thud that somehow echoed in my ears like a slammed door. Linda from HR sat beside him, nodding sympathetically while avoiding eye contact, her silver-framed glasses catching the light as she tilted her head downward. The necessary downside affects several departments, she added, her voice softening as if speaking to a child. This isn't a reflection on your performance, Eleanor. Wasn't it, though? At 58, I was the oldest employee in client relations. My silver-streaked hair and reading glasses stood out in a department increasingly populated by 30-somethings with their sleek devices and MBA jargon. My salary was commensurate with my experience that had helped build Morrison and Associates from a scrappy legal consulting firm with a single floor in a modest building into an industry leader occupying prime real estate in downtown Boston. Does William know about this? I asked, referring to William Morrison, the founding partner with his British accent and old-school values, who had personally hired me 25 years ago when we both believed that people mattered more than percentages. Jason's jaw tightened, a momentary crack in his polished facade. All partners were consulted on restructuring decisions. An obvious non-answer. William had been in London for the past 3 weeks negotiating our expansion into the European market, something I had helped plan for nearly a year. Best of luck in your future endeavors, Jason concluded with a smile that never reached his eyes, standing to signal the end of my career. Security will escort you to clear out your desk. Standard protocol. I'd helped write that protocol 12 years ago, never imagining I'd be on the receiving end of its cold efficiency. My name is Eleanor Harrison, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the Senior Director of Client Relations at Morrison and Associates, one of Boston's premier legal consulting firms. I devoted my career to building relationships with our clients, understanding their needs, anticipating their concerns, and ensuring they felt valued beyond the billable hours. My refrigerator still held leftovers from the dinner party I'd hosted last week for the Westridge manufacturing executives, a personal touch that had sealed their contract renewal. In an industry where firms were often seen as interchangeable, I'd made sure our clients saw us as irreplaceable. Now, I was being discarded like an outdated policy manual, with nothing but a manila folder and platitudes to show for a quarter-century of dedication. As the security guard young Kevin, whose daughter had just started college on the scholarship I'd helped him apply for, hovered awkwardly by my desk, I methodically packed my personal items, photos with clients at charity galas, handwritten thank you notes from the Chambers family after we helped them navigate a complex corporate restructuring, the crystal paperweight William had given me on my 20th work anniversary with the inscription "To the heart of our firm." My hands trembled slightly as I wrapped it in tissue paper, the weight of memories far heavier than the object itself. My phone buzzed, a text from Samantha Winterfield, CEO of Winterfield Healthcare, our largest client. Eleanor, heard troubling rumors about changes at MNA. Our quarterly review is next week. Call me ASAP. This doesn't feel right. I looked up to see Jason watching from his glass-walled office, already on the phone, no doubt spinning damage control to the board. What he didn't know, what none of them seemed to understand, was that client relationships couldn't be transferred in a memo or reassigned in a database. They were built on trust, consistency, and personal connection, knowing that Samuel Chambers wouldn't discuss business until you'd asked about his grandson's baseball games, or that Samantha Winterfield preferred email updates on Thursdays because her board meetings were on Fridays. And I had just been severed from 25 years' worth of those connections, leaving them dangling like cut telephone wires. I joined Morrison & Associates in 1998 when we occupied half a floor in a modest office building and had exactly 17 clients. William Morrison was 42 then, bursting with ambition and determined to create a different kind of consulting firm, one where client satisfaction genuinely mattered more than billable hours. I remember his office had mismatched furniture and a coffee machine that worked only when it wanted to, but his eyes sparked with vision as he interviewed me. "Numbers are the language of business, Eleanor," he told me during my interview, leaning forward in his creaky chair, "but relationships are its heart. Anyone can crunch numbers, not everyone can build trust. I need someone who understands that difference." I'd felt an immediate connection to that philosophy, having just left a firm where clients were treated like billing codes rather than partners. Over the years, I'd embodied that philosophy. While others chased promotions through high-profile projects and office politics, I focused on becoming indispensable to our clients. I remembered their children's names and college choices. I kept notes on which clients wanted detailed technical explanations and which preferred big-picture summaries with analogies they could relate to. I tracked company milestones, leadership changes, and strategic pivots so we could anticipate their needs rather than merely respond to them. My office walls had displayed photos of client celebrations, thank you cards, and mementos from their significant moments, all now packed in a cardboard box like remnants of a life that no longer existed. "You're the relationship architect, Eleanor," William had said at my 20th anniversary celebration, raising a glass of champagne while the entire firm applauded. "You've built the foundation that supports everything we do. Without you, we'd just be another consulting firm with fancy graphs." The memory stung as I placed the last of my personal items in the box, aware of curious eyes watching through glass walls. The firm had grown steadily under William's leadership, but things began to change 2 years ago when we took on outside investors to fuel expansion. New partners joined the leadership team, bringing Harvard MBAs and strategic visions that increasingly prioritized efficiency metrics over client experience. They spoke a different language, not of relationships and trust, but of market penetration and resource optimization. Jason Sterling, with his slick presentations and ruthless focus on the bottom line, had been the most aggressive of these additions. Since his arrival, employee turnover had increased by 40%, mostly among those who'd been with the firm the longest. The unofficial motto had shifted from William's clients first to Jason's maximum value extraction, a phrase that made me cringe every time I heard it in strategy meetings. I'd voiced concerns during executive meetings, watching the faces around the table grow increasingly impatient with what they clearly viewed as outdated thinking. "We're sacrificing long-term stability for short-term gains," I argued, presenting data on client retention rates that had begun to slip. "The relationships we've built over decades can't be quantified on a quarterly report, but they're our most valuable asset." My voice had grown more isolated with each passing month. "The market is changing, Eleanor," Jason had responded dismissively, not even looking up from his tablet as he swiped through his presentation. "We need to adapt or die. Some of our legacy processes are frankly outdated." The word legacy had hung in the air like a euphemism for people like me. I'd noticed my gradual exclusion from strategic discussions over the past 6 months. Meeting invitations stopped arriving, email threads omitted my address. Younger team members were assigned to key client accounts as secondary contacts without my consultation. My calendar, once filled with client meetings and strategy sessions, had grown increasingly empty. Still, I'd assumed my institutional knowledge and client relationships would protect me. After all, I managed relationships with clients who represented over 60% of our annual revenue. Samantha Winterfield alone brought in nearly $4 million yearly and had explicitly stated in her last contract renewal that she wanted me as her primary contact. "You're the only one who understands our business model and culture," she'd told me over dinner. "The others just see us as numbers." Recently, though, I'd sensed something more ominous brewing. The whispers would stop when I entered the break room. Last week, I'd overheard Jason on the phone through his partially open office door. "The restructuring gives us an opportunity to trim the legacy fat. Their retirement plans would cost us millions in the long run." I'd walked away, telling myself he couldn't possibly be referring to me. After all, I'd just brought in the Chamber's account a $2.3 million annual contract. I should have seen it coming, but after 25 years, I'd made the mistake of thinking loyalty still counted for something. I'd made the mistake of believing that building the firm's reputation and client base would matter more than my age and salary line on the balance sheet. I'd made the mistake of trusting that William's vision would endure. The security guard, Kevin, not meeting my eyes, carried my box to the elevator. "I'm sorry, Miss Harrison," he whispered as the doors closed. "This isn't right." His words offered small comfort as I descended 20 floors, watching the numbers count down like the final moments of my career. At the apartment, the humiliation of being escorted from the building like a security threat still burned 3 days later. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by job search websites and unanswered texts from former colleagues offering sympathy but little else. The box from my office sat untouched in the corner, a cardboard tombstone marking the death of my career. Outside, spring had erupted in full bloom, mockingly cheerful against my mood. My LinkedIn profile had exploded with views, nothing like a sudden termination to make you temporarily interesting in the professional world. I scrolled through notifications, recognizing names of competitors and former clients. The photo of my late husband David smiled at me from the bookshelf, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way I'd loved. "What would you tell me to do now?" I whispered to his image. We'd been married 22 years when cancer took him 5 years ago. Now his picture and my daughter's graduation photo were my silent companions in this unexpected new chapter. My landline rang, a rare occurrence these days. I almost let it go to voicemail, probably another recruiter offering entry-level positions at half my former salary, until I recognized the number on the caller ID. William Morrison. My finger hovered over the answer button, emotions warring inside me. "Hello, Eleanor, it's William." His familiar British accent was tighter than usual, strain evident in each syllable. "I just landed from London and heard the news. This wasn't authorized by me. I need you to know that." A complicated wave of emotions crashed over me, relief that William hadn't approved my termination, anger that it had happened anyway, and a lingering sense of betrayal that he hadn't protected me despite our history. I looked at the framed photo of us from the firm's 20th anniversary gala, both of us laughing with champagne glasses raised. "Well, it happened regardless," I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite the hurt clawing at my throat. "Jason said all partners were consulted." I suppose that was a creative interpretation of reality. "I was deliberately sidelined," William said, his frustration evident in the way his accent sharpened. They waited until I was overseas dealing with the EU regulatory issues. The executive committee pushed it through on an emergency approval basis, citing immediate necessity to improve quarterly projections before our investor meeting. When I landed and checked my messages, he trailed off, and I could picture him running a hand through his thinning hair the way he did when upset. 25 years, William. My voice finally cracked, the professional mask slipping. I deserved better than a 10-minute meeting and a security escort. I helped build that firm from nothing. I remember when we celebrated landing our 10th client with cheap champagne in plastic cups. You deserved much better, he agreed, sighing heavily. I want to make this right. What if I bring you back? We can call it a misunderstanding, a communication error. I still have enough influence to make it happen. I walked to the window, looking out at the Boston skyline where M&A's building dominated the view. The thought of walking back through those doors, facing the whispers, the sidelong glances, the knowledge that Jason and the board had wanted me gone. It's not that simple, I interrupted, watching a pair of birds building a nest in the tree outside my window. Jason made it crystal clear that I'm considered dispensable. Legacy fat was the term I heard him use when he didn't know I was nearby. How effective would I be in an environment where leadership has already decided I'm obsolete? The silence on the other end told me William understood the significance of what I was saying. In the corporate world, being undermined by leadership was a death sentence to effectiveness. There was no coming back from that, not really. No matter what title they gave me, I'd always be the person they tried to discard. I'm sorry, Eleanor, truly. His voice softened with genuine regret. This company was built on the relationships you nurtured. Your client handling skills set the standard for everyone who followed. And how are those relationships being maintained now that I'm gone? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Another pause. Jason assigned your accounts to the junior partners. Allison Parker is handling Winterfield Healthcare. I couldn't suppress a dry laugh, the sound brittle in my quiet apartment. Samantha Winterfield had openly clashed with Allison during a strategy session last year, finding her approach too aggressive and impersonal. That young woman speaks in buzzwords instead of English, she'd told me afterward. Good luck with that arrangement. Samantha has already texted me about troubling rumors. That's concerning, William admitted, and I could hear the worry beneath his controlled tone. Eleanor, perhaps we could meet to discuss this further? Perhaps, I said non-committally. I need some time, William. This isn't just about a job. This is about 25 years of my life. After hanging up, I stared at my phone as it began to light up with notifications. Clients were reaching out, not just Samantha, but Douglas from Archer Pharmaceutical, Belinda from Summit Financial, the entire executive team at Westridge Manufacturing. Word was spreading about my departure like wildfire through the close-knit professional community. I hadn't reached out to any of them. I was too professional to badmouth my former employer, regardless of how they treated me. But clients talk to each other. They belong to the same industry groups, sit on the same boards, attend the same conferences. And the news that the relationship architect had been unceremoniously shown the door was apparently causing ripples I hadn't anticipated. My doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. A courier handed me a thick cream-colored envelope with gold embossing. Inside was a formal letter from Rebecca Goldman, the most sought-after headhunter in Boston's consulting world, along with a handwritten note on heavy stationery. Heard what happened at M&A. Several firms would value your client portfolio and relationship expertise. Dinner tomorrow? The industry is buzzing about Jason's short-sightedness. I set the letter down on my coffee table, thinking about Jason's smug face as he terminated me, the practiced smile that never touched his eyes. I wasn't going to sabotage Morrison and Associates. I didn't need to. They had already done that themselves. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:38 a.m. while I was still in my robe, staring at the steam rising from my coffee cup. Samantha Winterfield never wanted to waste time with pleasantries, and true to form, she launched straight into business the moment I answered. "Tell me you're not actually gone," she demanded without preamble, her voice carrying the sharp edge that had intimidated countless boardrooms but had always softened when speaking with me. We built a rapport over 12 years that went beyond business. We were two women of similar age who had navigated male-dominated industries with determination and strategic finesse. "I'm afraid I am," I replied, pouring another cup of coffee and settling into the window seat where the morning light cast patterns across the hardwood floor. Outside, dogwood trees were beginning to bloom, their white flowers punctuating the cityscape like scattered clouds. "Restructuring, they called it," Samantha snapped, and I could picture her pacing her home office, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in its customary severe bun. "I've worked exclusively with you for 12 years. Allison Parker emailed me yesterday introducing herself as my new relationship manager. That girl tried to explain my own business model to me last year. She sent me a PowerPoint with clip art, Eleanor. Clip art." I suppressed a smile despite myself. Samantha's disdain for corporate clichés was legendary. "Morrison and Associates is making strategic changes." I chose my words carefully, the professional mask slipping back into place automatically. "I'm sure they believe they're acting in the best interest of their clients. Don't give me the corporate line, Eleanor. We've known each other too long." Samantha paused, and I heard her taking a breath. "Where are you going next? Archer? Blackstone? If you're considering options, Winterfield Healthcare should be part of your calculation." I looked at the pile of messages that had accumulated over the past 3 days, calls from competitors, inquiries from clients, meeting requests from firms I'd competed against for years. "I haven't decided yet. Everything is still fresh." "Well, decide quickly," she said, her tone softening slightly. "Our contract with M&A is up for renewal in 60 days. I'd prefer to follow you." This was the moment I should have said something reassuring about Morrison and Associates, about the quality of their work remaining consistent despite personnel changes. That's what professionalism dictated after 25 years of representing the firm. Instead, my fingers traced the pattern of sunlight on my hardwood floor as I said, "I appreciate your confidence, Samantha. Let me explore my options and get back to you by noon." "Good. And Eleanor?" She paused. "What they did was short-sighted and cruel. Don't let them make you doubt your value. In our industry, relationships are the true currency, and you're the Federal Reserve." After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began documenting the client calls and messages, not to solicit them, but to keep track of the unexpected wave of support. By dinner time, that number had risen to 11 major clients expressing concern and interest in my future plans. I hadn't solicited any of them. I hadn't needed to. The relationships I'd built over a quarter-century were speaking for themselves, louder than any corporate restructuring plan could have anticipated. Meeting with Rebecca Goldman met me at an upscale restaurant in Back Bay, her sharp eyes assessing me over reading glasses as she gestured toward the wine list. The restaurant hummed with the quiet conversation of Boston's professional elite, making deals and trading industry gossip over expense account meals. "You're the talk of the industry right now," she said after ordering, removing her glasses and fixing me with a penetrating stare. Rebecca had built her headhunting firm on an uncanny ability to match talent with opportunity, and she'd been trying to recruit me for competitors for years. Jason Sterling made a catastrophic mistake. Did he really think clients like Samantha Winterfield would just accept a reassignment memo? Perhaps, I said non-committally, sipping my water and noticing how the evening light cast golden hues across the dining room. The restaurant overlooked the Charles River, and couples strolled along the pathway below, their lives untouched by corporate politics. She laughed, the sound both warm and sharp. Always diplomatic. That's part of your appeal. You've never had a bad word to say about anyone, even when they deserved it. She reached into her leather portfolio and slid a folder across the table. 3 firms want to meet with you. 2 are creating a special position specifically to bring you and your client relationships on board. I glanced at the compensation figures and nearly choked on my water. They were offering almost double my previous salary, along with partnership titles and equity arrangements that M&A had never put on the table despite my years of service. They're not just paying for your expertise, Eleanor, Rebecca explained, reading my expression with the skill that made her Boston's premier talent broker. They're paying for your little black book. Those client relationships you've nurtured for decades are pure gold. Jason Sterling saw your salary as a liability. These firms see your network as an asset worth investing in. The irony wasn't lost on me. After being discarded as too expensive by Morrison and Associates, I was now worth twice as much to their competitors. I wondered if Jason had considered this possibility in his cost-cutting calculations, if he'd bothered to calculate the lifetime value of the client relationships he was so casually reassigning. I'll need time to review these, I said, closing the folder and feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the restaurant's ambient lighting. It was validation, concrete proof that my work had value beyond what M&A had been willing to recognize. Take all the time you need, Rebecca replied with a knowing smile. Though I should warn you, word travels fast in our circles. I'd be surprised if William Morrison doesn't call you again very soon. Her prediction proved remarkably accurate. The next day, the next morning, William called again as I was reviewing the offers Rebecca had presented. His voice carried an urgency I'd rarely heard in all our years working together. I need to see you, he said, sounding uncharacteristically agitated, the British accent thickening as it always did under stress. Can you come to the office? There are developments we should discuss in person. I looked out my apartment window toward the M&A building, its glass exterior gleaming in the morning sun. The thought of walking through those doors again, past the sympathetic or curious glances of former colleagues, made my stomach tighten. I don't think that's appropriate, given the circumstances. The security escort made the boundaries quite clear. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice, the memory of Kevin carrying my box to the elevator still fresh and stinging. Then lunch. The Harvest, 1 p.m., please, Eleanor. His voice softened, almost pleading. Things are happening that you should know about. Things that might change your perspective. Curiosity got the better of me. The Harvest was where we'd celebrated landing our first major client all those years ago, when the firm was still small enough to fit around one table. At precisely 1 p.m., I walked into the restaurant, dressed in my best suit, armor for whatever this meeting might bring. William was already seated, looking haggard. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and his normally immaculate appearance seemed slightly disheveled, his tie askew. Thank you for coming, he said, relief evident in his voice as he stood to greet me. His handshake was warm, but his fingers trembled slightly. I've been trying to fix this situation, but Jason is blocking me at every turn. He's convinced the board that your termination was necessary for modernizing our approach. He's presenting charts showing cost savings and efficiency metrics that look impressive on paper. I settled into my chair, placing my napkin in my lap with deliberate calm. And the clients? How are they responding to this modernization? Has Samantha Winterfield embraced Allison's innovative PowerPoint presentations? William winced, running a hand through his thinning hair. Not well. Samantha has demanded a meeting with the entire executive team. She's coming in tomorrow and made it clear she expects answers about your departure. Douglas from Archer is reviewing their options. 3 smaller clients have already given notice. He looked down at his untouched water glass. It's happening faster than even I anticipated. I sipped my water, saying nothing, letting the silence stretch between us. Through the restaurant window, I could see the river where William and I had once walked during a lunch break, planning the firm's 5-year expansion strategy. That had been before outside investors, before Jason Sterling and his Harvard MBA cohort, before legacy fat became a term used to describe people like me. Here's what I'm proposing, William continued, leaning forward with renewed energy. I create a new position, Chief Client Officer, reporting directly to me, bypassing Jason entirely. Better compensation, more autonomy. You'd have oversight of all major client relationships. We announce it next week, frame it as a strategic elevation of client services. It sounded perfect, exactly what I would have wanted a week ago. The title, the recognition, the authority to protect the client-centered approach I believed in. Too perfect. I studied William's expression and saw something beyond concern, fear. His eyes darted around the restaurant, his fingers fidgeted with his silverware, signs of anxiety I'd learned to read over decades of working together. What aren't you telling me, William? I asked, leaning forward to mirror his posture. This isn't just about me or even the clients, is it? He hesitated, then sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. Jason has a plan to push me into early retirement. He's been consolidating power, building alliances with the newer partners, especially since the investment group came on board. If the client situation deteriorates further, he'll use it as leverage to force me out. He's already suggesting to the board that my traditional approaches are out of step with modern consulting practices. The pieces clicked into place. William's urgent call, the generous offer, the new title, it wasn't about rectifying the injustice done to me. It was about using me as a shield against Jason's power play. So that was it. You're not trying to save me, you're trying to save yourself. I'm simply the means to that end. The words came out cooler than I intended, but the realization stung. Even William, who I'd considered a friend as much as a colleague, was approaching this as a transaction. It's not that simple, Eleanor. I do value you, you know that. But yes, I need your help. We both have something to gain here. At least he was being honest now, the desperation evident in his eyes. I took a slow breath, thinking of the offers in my briefcase, the calls from clients, the message from Rebecca this morning about another firm expressing interest. I'm sorry, William, but I already have meetings scheduled with other firms. You understand, business decisions aren't personal. The look on his face as I threw Jason's words back at him almost made the whole ordeal worthwhile. Almost. William blanched, his fork clattering against his plate. You're meeting with competitors? Eleanor, after all these years, I interrupted quietly. I was escorted from the building by security. After all these years, my loyalty was rewarded with a manila folder and 2 months severance. After all these years, you weren't there when it mattered. The words hung between us, heavy with a quarter-century of shared history and its bitter conclusion. He had no answer for that. The following week, over the next week, I met with all 3 firms Rebecca had recommended. Each meeting followed a similar pattern: corner offices with sweeping views, firm principals eager to impress, effusive praise for my client relationship skills, thinly veiled questions about which clients might follow me, and increasingly generous compensation offers. The corporate courtship dance was flattering after the abrupt dismissal from M&A, but I found myself evaluating them through a new lens. I wasn't just looking for salary and title, I was assessing their values, their approach to client relationships, whether they truly understood that business was about people, not just profit margins. I was leaning toward Hudson Consulting, a mid-sized firm with values reminiscent of the original Morrison and Associates. Their offices were less opulent than the others, but their client retention statistics were impressive, and their founding partner, Elizabeth Hudson, spoke about clients with genuine warmth rather than referring to them as assets or revenue streams. Their offer included equity partnership, something I'd never been offered at M&A despite my contributions to the firm's growth. "We've competed against you for years," Elizabeth said during our second meeting, her direct gaze reflecting the no-nonsense approach that had built her firm from scratch. "I've lost count of how many potential clients told us they stayed with M&A because of their relationship with you. We'd rather have you on our side of the table." Meanwhile, the situation at Morrison and Associates was deteriorating faster than even I had anticipated. Industry blogs were reporting client unrest and leadership tensions. My former assistant, Michael Thompson, texted me updates. Samantha Winterfield had indeed met with the executive team and left visibly angry. Douglas from Archer Pharmaceuticals had canceled their quarterly review. Even Westridge Manufacturing, a client known for their institutional loyalty, was rumored to be seeking proposals from competitors. "Jason's walking around like he's about to explode," Michael texted one afternoon. "3 more clients called this morning asking specifically about your departure. The partners are having emergency meetings daily." I wasn't orchestrating any of this. I hadn't reached out to clients or encouraged them to question their relationship with M&A. But the bonds I'd built over decades were proving stronger than corporate restructuring plans had accounted for. A surprising call, then came the call that changed everything. "Eleanor Harrison," I answered, while reviewing Hudson's offer letter in my home office, sunlight streaming through the windows as spring fully established itself across Boston. "Miss Harrison, this is Robert Harrington from the Boston Business Journal." The voice was professional, measured, the kind that conducted interviews for a living. I sat up straighter, setting down my coffee cup. The BBJ was the Bible of Boston's corporate world, its articles and profiles closely followed by everyone who mattered in the business community. "Yes, how can I help you?" "I'm working on a story about the recent leadership changes at Morrison and Associates and their impact on client relationships. Several sources have mentioned your name. Would you be willing to comment on the circumstances of your departure and the subsequent client reactions?" This was dangerous territory. Anything I said could be construed as disparaging my former employer, potentially exposing me to legal action under the non-disparagement clause in my severance agreement. I chose my words with careful precision. "I'm not comfortable commenting on internal matters at Morrison and Associates. My focus is on my future opportunities." "Professional, neutral, safe." "Understandable," Harrington said, and I could hear typing in the background. "What about the fact that 7 major clients have already announced they're terminating their relationships with M&A? Industry insiders are suggesting this exodus is directly related to your departure." 7 clients? I'd only spoken directly with 5, and none had definitively stated they were leaving M&A. The ripple effect was apparently larger than I realized. I felt a complex mix of vindication and concern. These were relationships I'd nurtured for years, and despite everything, part of me still cared about their welfare. "I can't speak to clients' business decisions," I said, moving to my window where I could see the M&A building in the distance. "Many factors go into selecting consulting partners." "Of course." More typing. "One more question. Any comment on the letter signed by 26 of M&A's senior clients demanding William Morrison replace Jason Sterling as managing partner? I nearly dropped the phone, gripping the windowsill to steady myself. I have no knowledge of such a letter. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, the implications of what he was saying slowly sinking in. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence, staring at the view without seeing it. 26 clients? An organized demand to replace Jason? I hadn't orchestrated any of this, hadn't even imagined such a coordinated response was possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael, emergency all-hands meeting called for tomorrow morning. Partners flying in from everywhere. Jason looks like he's about to have a stroke. Arthur's panicked call. An hour later, William called, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Did you organize this client revolt? He demanded without preamble, the accusation cutting through the phone line. I've done nothing, William, I replied, surprisingly calm in the face of his agitation. I haven't solicited a single client. I've been focused on my own next steps. It was the truth, I hadn't needed to orchestrate anything. The relationships spoke for themselves. Then how do you explain this? He sounded desperate, his accent thickening with stress. 70% of our client base is threatening to leave. The board is in panic mode. Investors are demanding answers. 26 clients signed a joint letter demanding Jason's removal, citing your termination as evidence of the firm's abandonment of core values. I don't know, William. I moved back to my window seat, watching birds build a nest in the tree outside. Perhaps they value relationship continuity more than cost-cutting efficiency. Perhaps they don't appreciate being treated as transferable assets. Perhaps they've formed their own opinions about the direction M&A is heading. This isn't a joke, Eleanor. 25 years of building this firm, and it could collapse in 25 days. The fear in his voice was palpable, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. There was a bitter satisfaction in hearing the panic in William's voice, the same William who had failed to protect me after 25 years of loyalty, who had been willing to use me as a shield against Jason only when it served his interests. I couldn't deny the small flame of vindication warming my chest. What do you want from me, William? Come back, he pleaded, all pretense gone. Not as chief client officer, as full equity partner. Help me stabilize the situation. The clients trust you. They'll listen to you. Partner. The position I deserved for at least a decade but had been repeatedly denied while younger, less experienced colleagues were elevated around me. Now it was being offered not as recognition of my value, but as a desperate measure to save a sinking ship. And Jason? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. William's voice hardened. The board is meeting tonight. His future will be decided before tomorrow's all-hands meeting. I thought about the Hudson offer on my desk. Partnership there would be comfortable, lucrative, and far less complicated than returning to M&A. But I'd built those client relationships over 25 years. They were, in many ways, my life's work. The thought of walking away from them completely, of starting fresh with new clients who didn't yet know me or trust me, made something twist inside my chest. I need to think about it, I said finally, watching a pair of birds carefully place twigs in their new nest. I'll give you my answer in the morning. A sleepless night, sleep eluded me that night. I paced my apartment, weighing my options while the digital clock ticked toward morning and the city lights glittered beyond my windows. Returning to Morrison and Associates would mean facing the colleagues who had watched my humiliating exit in silence. It would mean navigating the political aftermath of Jason's apparent downfall, a downfall I hadn't engineered but would certainly be blamed for. The firm's culture had been deteriorating for years, one leadership change wouldn't fix that overnight. I paused by the photo of my late husband, running my fingers over the frame. "What would you tell me, David?" I whispered to his smiling image. He had always been my sounding board, my reality check. I could almost hear his response: "Follow your heart, but protect yourself. You've earned the right to choose your path." I looked at my daughter's photo next to his, remembering how she'd called me after hearing about my termination, outraged on my behalf. "Mom, this is your chance to make a fresh start. Don't go back to people who didn't value you until they needed you." On the other hand, Hudson offered a fresh start, new colleagues, new culture, new opportunities. Elizabeth Hudson had promised me freedom to build a client relations department based on my own philosophy. The compensation and partnership were generous. I could bring willing clients with me and build something vibrant, unencumbered by M&A's corporate politics and shifting values. By 6 a.m., I'd made my decision. I called Rebecca Goldman, knowing she'd be awake. The woman famously started her day at 5:30 with strategic calls to the East Coast's power players. "I'm going with Hudson," I told her, feeling a weight lift as the words left my mouth. The decision felt right, a step towards something new rather than a retreat to the familiar. "Smart choice," she replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "I'll let them know. They'll be thrilled." "There's something else I need from them," I added, explaining my condition. Rebecca listened, then laughed with genuine delight. "Ruthless Eleanor, I love it. I didn't know you had this in you." Her admiration was evident. "I'll present it to them this morning. I think Elizabeth will appreciate the strategic brilliance." "It's not ruthlessness," I corrected, watching the sunrise begin to paint the Boston skyline in gold. "It's simply recognizing value, my own, and what I've built over 25 years. The confrontation, at 8:45 a.m., I walked into Morrison and Associates for the first time since my termination. The lobby seemed different somehow, the same gleaming marble and modern art, but the energy had shifted. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me, a mixture of surprise and something like hope crossing her face. "Miss Harrison, you're here for the all-hands meeting?" she asked, her voice lowered conspiratorially. The click of my heels against the marble floor felt like a statement as I nodded. "I am. William is expecting me." The words carried a confidence I hadn't felt since before my termination. I wore my best suit, navy blue with subtle pinstripes, my power armor as David had once called it, and carried myself with the poise of someone who knew her worth. The conference room was packed when I arrived, the tension palpable. Partners who normally attended virtually had flown in from across the country, their travel-weary faces turned expectantly toward the front. Junior staff crowded along the walls, whispering among themselves. William stood at the front, flanked by board members in various states of concern. Jason was conspicuously absent, his usual seat at the right of the podium noticeably empty. A hush fell over the room as I entered, the conversation stopping mid-sentence like a conductor had silenced an orchestra. William's relief was visible from across the room, his shoulders relaxing slightly at the sight of me. I took a seat in the back, nodding to Michael, who gave me a subtle thumbs up from where he stood against the wall. The room smelled of coffee and anxiety, the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows casting dramatic shadows across the assembled faces. "Thank you all for coming," William began, his voice steadier than it had been on the phone yesterday. "As you know, we're facing unprecedented client concerns following recent staffing decisions." His eyes flickered to me, a silent acknowledgement. "I'm pleased to announce that Eleanor Harrison has agreed to return to Morrison and Associates as a full equity partner, leading our newly formed client relations division." Murmurs spread through the crowd, heads turning to look at me with expressions ranging from surprise to relief. I maintained a neutral expression, meeting their gazes calmly. William raised his hand for silence. Additionally, the board has unanimously voted to remove Jason Sterling as managing partner, effective immediately. His approach was ultimately deemed inconsistent with our firm's values and client commitment. More murmurs, louder this time, with undercurrents of shock and vindication. The atmosphere in the room was electric, shock, relief, and uncertainty mingling almost visibly in the air like separate currents in a stream. People exchanged glances, some nodding in approval, others looking concerned about what these changes meant for their own positions. "Eleanor, would you like to say a few words?" William gestured me forward, his expression hopeful, almost eager. This was the moment of reconciliation he'd envisioned, the prodigal daughter returning to save the family business. As I took my place at the front of the room, I surveyed the faces before me. Some hopeful, some wary, all attentive. I recognized most of them, colleagues I'd worked alongside for years, younger staff I'd mentored, a few newer faces hired during Jason's tenure. Michael gave me a subtle thumbs up from the back wall, his expression quietly triumphant. "Thank you, William. I appreciate the offer to return as partner," I began, my voice clear and steady. The weight of what I was about to do settled on my shoulders, not as a burden but as a mantle of power I'd earned through decades of building something valuable. However, I must clarify something important. I'm not coming back to Morrison and Associates. William's face froze in confusion, the smile dying on his lips. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances, papers rustling as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Instead, I continued calmly, drawing strength from the knowledge that I was standing exactly where I was meant to be. "I'm pleased to announce that I've accepted a partnership position at Hudson Consulting, which has just completed acquisition negotiations with Horizon Capital to purchase a controlling interest in Morrison and Associates." The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Papers dropped, a coffee cup spilled, voices raised in disbelief and confusion. William looked as though he'd been struck, the color draining from his face as the implications sank in. I waited, standing perfectly still at the podium until the noise began to subside, my presence a calm center in the storm I'd unleashed. "The transition will begin next week," I continued once the noise subsided enough for me to be heard. "Hudson has assured me they value the institutional knowledge and client relationships built here. There are no plans for mass layoffs or restructuring, unless, of course, they're deemed necessary for efficiency." The echo of Jason's corporate language was deliberate, and I saw recognition dawn in several faces. William stepped forward, his voice strained, hands trembling slightly. "Eleanor, what have you done?" The betrayal in his eyes might have moved me a week ago, but now it merely confirmed I'd made the right choice. "I haven't done anything, William," I replied, maintaining the professional composure that had been my hallmark for 25 years. "Hudson has been seeking to expand their Boston presence for years. Horizon Capital, as majority shareholder in M&A, was happy to consider their offer, especially given recent client instability. It's just business, after all. Nothing personal." The words hung in the air, landing with precision where they were aimed. As the implications sank in, I saw the dawning realization in William's eyes. He had failed to protect me when it mattered. He had allowed loyalty to be sacrificed for short-term gains. Now, facing his own obsolescence, he understood the true cost of those decisions. The lesson was harsh but necessary. Value goes both ways. Loyalty is earned, not just given. The meeting dissolved into chaos as I walked out, head high, the clicking of my heels on the marble floor marking the rhythm of my exit. The security guard who had escorted me out days ago nodded with something like respect as I passed. My phone buzzed with a text from Samantha, "Just heard the news." Dinner tonight to discuss Winterfield Healthcare's future with Hudson Morrison? I smiled as I stepped into the elevator, watching the doors close on the pandemonium I'd left behind. I hadn't sought revenge when Morrison and Associates terminated me. I hadn't needed to. But I had seized an opportunity to reclaim my own value and reshape the future of the relationships I'd spent a career building. The quiet confidence that had carried me through 25 years in business had finally been recognized for what it was, not just a personality trait, but a powerful force that could redirect the course of an entire firm. Justice, it turned out, didn't need to announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it simply required patience and the quiet confidence of knowing your own worth. The aftermath: the Boston Business Journal broke the story the next morning. Consulting shakeup: Hudson acquires Morrison and Associates after client exodus. The article appeared on the front page of the business section, featuring a stock photo of M&A's gleaming office building beneath dramatic headlines. I read it over breakfast, sipping my coffee as sunlight poured through my kitchen windows, casting warm patterns across the granite countertop. The article detailed how the departure of a key senior executive had triggered an unprecedented client revolt, destabilizing the firm enough to make the acquisition possible. My name appeared only once, buried in the 15th paragraph. Eleanor Harrison, former Senior Director of Client Relations, has accepted a partnership at Hudson and will oversee the integration of Morrison and Associates client portfolios. It was a clinical description of what was, in reality, a seismic power shift. Within 3 weeks, I had gone from terminated employee to the person controlling the fate of the very firm that had discarded me. The irony wasn't lost on me as I folded the newspaper and prepared for my first day at Hudson, where Elizabeth had arranged a corner office with views of the harbor. The integration planning began immediately. I worked from Hudson's offices, reviewing organizational charts and client portfolios from both firms, identifying where synergies existed and where cultural shifts would be needed. The window behind my new desk overlooked Boston Harbor, where sailboats drifted lazily in the summer breeze, a far cry from the view of neighboring skyscrapers I'd had at M&A for decades. Each day brought a parade of former Morrison colleagues to my door, some seeking reassurance about their positions, others suddenly remembering how they'd always respected my work or disagreed with Jason's decision. Some came with thinly disguised resentment, others with transparent relief. I met them all with the same professional courtesy, neither holding grudges nor forgetting who had stood where when it mattered. I always told Jason that cutting you was a mistake, claimed Brad from tax services, who had said nothing of the sort when it happened. I'm glad to see things working out this way. I hope there's still a place for those of us who believed in the original M&A vision, said Cynthia from marketing, who had enthusiastically embraced Jason's rebranding initiatives. I listened to them all, nodding pleasantly, offering neither condemnation nor absolution. Hudson values talent, I told them simply. And they understand that client relationships are built on consistency and trust. William requested a meeting 1 week after the acquisition announcement. He'd aged a decade in 20 days, the lines around his eyes deepened, his posture less commanding than I remembered. When he arrived at my new office, he paused at the threshold, taking in the space with its understated elegance, so different from the chrome and glass modernism of M&A. "You orchestrated this," he said as he sat across from me, not a question but an accusation. His eyes held a mixture of anger and reluctant admiration. "No, William. I simply recognized my own value, even when you didn't," I replied, pouring him tea from the porcelain set Elizabeth had gifted me as a welcome present. Jason was a symptom, not the cause. I set the cup before him, the familiar ritual of hospitality unchanged despite our altered circumstances. "You allowed the firm's culture to change. You prioritized growth over relationships. You forgot the principles you founded the company on. He stared down at the tea, watching the steam rise. And now you control it all, he said bitterly, looking older than his years in the soft light filtering through my window. Not control, William. Influence. There's a difference. One you used to understand. I slid a document across the desk, its leather portfolio embossed with the new Hudson Morrison logo. Hudson is offering you a 3-year consulting position. Advisory only, no management responsibilities. It's generous, considering the circumstances. He stared at the paper, then at me, searching my face for some trace of the eager associate he'd hired 25 years ago. And if I refuse? Then you walk away with nothing but your ownership payout. Your choice. I took a sip of my tea, letting him consider the options. The new firm could benefit from your experience, William. But only if you remember why you started M&A in the first place, to build something that valued relationships as much as results. 6 months later, 6 months after the acquisition, Hudson Morrison Consulting occupied 2 floors of a gleaming downtown tower overlooking the harbor. The integration had been smoother than anyone anticipated, partly because I'd insisted on retaining most of Morrison's staff, knowing their value even when others hadn't. The rebranding had been subtle but effective, preserving elements of both firms' identities while creating something new and forward-looking. Jason had landed at a smaller firm across town, his reputation tarnished by the spectacular collapse he'd triggered. I occasionally saw his name mentioned in industry publications, usually in cautionary articles about short-sighted leadership. William had accepted the consulting role, though our interactions remained strictly professional. During quarterly strategy meetings, he would sometimes catch my eye across the conference table, a tacit acknowledgement passing between us. The wound of betrayal, his failure to protect me after 25 years, would never fully heal. But professional bridges, unlike personal ones, could sometimes be rebuilt on pragmatic foundations. In my corner office, light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of boats navigating the harbor, I reviewed the quarterly numbers with a satisfaction I'd never allowed myself to show publicly. Client retention through the transition had exceeded 95%, unheard of in acquisition scenarios. The 3 clients who'd left during the initial exodus had already returned, citing the stabilized leadership and renewed focus on relationship management. Our combined revenues were up 23% year-over-year. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. My assistant, Michael, who had eagerly followed me to Hudson, appeared with his tablet. "Ms. Winterfield is here for your lunch," he said with a smile. "And Elizabeth would like to discuss the mentorship program when you return." I nodded, closing the performance reports and standing to greet Samantha as she swept into my office. She looked elegant as always in a tailored suit, her silver-streaked hair framing a face that had navigated decades of corporate battles with determination and grace. "Congratulations on the quarterly results," she said, embracing me briefly before stepping back to survey the office. "The industry is still talking about the most elegant corporate takeover they've seen in decades. You didn't burn a single bridge, yet you completely changed the power dynamics." I smiled, gathering my coat as we prepared to head to lunch at our favorite waterfront restaurant. It wasn't a takeover. It was a market correction. "Call it what you want," Samantha laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners in amusement. "You proved what I've always known. In professional services, the relationships are the real asset. Everything else is just infrastructure." As we headed to lunch, walking along the harbor where summer was giving way to the first hints of fall, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. I hadn't sought revenge when Morrison and Associates terminated me. I hadn't needed to. The firm had failed to recognize that their true value wasn't in their systems or strategies or even their brand. It was in the human connections that made clients feel understood, valued, and prioritized. By severing me without understanding what I represented, they had orchestrated their own downfall. And in doing so, they had inadvertently launched me into a position I'd earned through 25 years of dedication, not just a partnership, but a legacy of my own creation. The mentorship program Elizabeth and I were developing would ensure that the next generation understood what Jason and ultimately William had forgotten, that behind every spreadsheet and strategy deck were people whose trust had to be earned and maintained. That business, at its core, was about human connection. Sometimes justice doesn't require action. Sometimes it simply requires patience and the quiet confidence of knowing your own worth. And sometimes, when the moment is right, it requires the courage to step forward and claim the value you've created.